Hi, I'm Jennifer Cooper, and I'm the Director of Education at the Down Syndrome Connection of the Bay Area. I'm the parent of two teenage boys, Eli, who's 19 and has Down syndrome, and Oliver, who is 17. I became familiar and passionate about doing ability awareness presentations when my oldest son, Eli, was in first grade. What is an ability awareness presentation? Ability awareness presentations are when a teacher or a parent, an adult, goes to a classroom or even several classes or a whole school and talks to that school about disability. Specifically, I go and talk about Down syndrome, and I typically go when there is a student who has Down syndrome in that class or in that school. And I'm talking to that student's peers about what it means to have Down syndrome, what is Down syndrome, how does that look in the classroom, and how they can be helpful peers and classmates to somebody with Down syndrome, or really to any disability. Like I said, I'm talking about Down syndrome specifically, but an ability awareness presentation cuts across many lines of disability and diversity, really. It's about being respectful. It's about opening up conversations in a safe space, allowing kids to ask questions, and speaking about topics that at times are topics that we might tend to avoid. And in my opinion, when we avoid certain topics, such as Down syndrome or some specific disability, or something that might be seen as a challenge, it can imply to the students that it's a negative topic, that it's something that we choose to avoid, that it's something that's not okay to talk about. And that's one of the many reasons why I find it's important to do these ability awareness presentations, to make sure that students don't think that Down syndrome is a negative thing, is a bad thing, or is something to hide. Ability awareness presentations are a key component of setting the foundation to build true friendships. If you don't have those conversations and don't open up the doors to understand why a student might look a little bit differently or learn a little bit differently, those students think that they're just the odd one out and look at them with more curiosity than inclusion, in my opinion. I've really seen a shift in the way that peers relate to students with disabilities, both before an ability awareness presentation and after. In fact, sometimes the thing we have to be the most concerned about is that after a presentation, students are almost too desirous and wanting to include their peers with disabilities. And we want to make sure that that doesn't mean that they're helping them all the time or sitting on their laps, etc., etc. And because of that, that's also part of the discussion at an ability awareness presentation. We talk about those specific ways that students can be helpful, and sometimes that actually means not helping, which is not doing, I should say, because being helpful is not always doing things for students. So when Eli was in first grade, I was met with a little bit resistance about why do an ability awareness presentation. The kids are great, the kids are inclusive. Why call out something that doesn't seem, that the kids weren't asking questions yet? It didn't seem like he was treated much differently than the other students, and why call it out and make it different? Well, again, the reason is because students do notice, and it is different. And we want to celebrate differences and celebrate diversities rather than to hide them. With these conversations, I've been fortunate enough to have many of them, and in fact, Eli and I together have spoken to now approaching almost 5,000 students. And in those conversations, we've had the opportunity to meet kids who then share stories about their own either relationship to disabilities, whether it's a family member or a cousin or a friend, or even themselves. People will share stories about a heart condition. I had a young boy raise his hand and show me that he had only 3 fingers on his hand. And I even just this past year had a boy tell me that he too understood the importance of friends, as he had just moved to this country last year, didn't speak the English well, and needed friends. So who presents and facilitates these lessons? Like I said, it's an adult. I have done a lot of them, but the reason why I'm doing this video is because I can't do them all and shouldn't do them all. It can be parents, it can be teachers, it can be inclusion specialists at the school psychologists. It could be any educator or parent of a student with that disability. Now, ideally, I do like the parent of the focus student to be there because I feel like we want it to be personalized about that student, not just about the disability itself. If the parents aren't able to participate in the ability awareness lesson, of course, it's critical that you get their approval to be able to speak about their child in specifically relating to that disability. If a parent doesn't want their child singled out as having a certain disability, you could potentially do lessons, on gifts and challenges, on differences in general, but you obviously cannot identify any one student as having a disability unless you have approval from their parents. So who needs ability awareness presentations? I, of course, think that most of our society does, but since that can't happen, I focus on kindergarten through 12th grades. And within that, I focus even more specifically on kindergarten through probably about 5th or 6th grade. I also focus on classrooms where there is a student with Down syndrome included or mainstreamed into that classroom. I love doing the ability awarenesses in small groups, 1 or 2 classrooms at a time, because it's a more intimate and safe conversation. That being said, I also think it's important to make sure that as many students as possible can be educated. So because of that, there's times when I've done presentations that are from kindergarten to 2nd grade at a school, and then a whole nother assembly from 3rd grade through 5th grade. Also, we do whole grades. So if you have a student who's included, say, in 2nd grade, we might do all the 2nd grade classrooms, whether that's 1, 2, 3, 4 2nd grades, do them all together. You could also do them in 2 groups if you feel like a smaller, more intimate presentation is the way to go for you. Also, if a student's included in a classroom and they are buddied up with another class, say for buddy reading or partner reading in some way, you want to do that other class as well. I also invite the whole adult team. I think it's important to have the paraprofessionals there, any aides, administrators, therapists, etc. As many people as you can get in the room to participate, the better. Now, how about the focus student? Should they be a part of it? That's a tricky question, and my general guidelines are for younger students who haven't been told or don't understand yet that they have Down syndrome, I say it's best to have them out of the classroom. I certainly don't ever want it to be the case where a student is in a classroom, a student with Down syndrome is in a classroom during an ability awareness presentation, and for the first time they're hearing specifically that they themselves have Down syndrome. That I don't want to have happen. So if they're familiar with the terms Down syndrome, or it's been just said in passing in the household, for example, with my 19-year-old son, we would just always use the terms Down syndrome. We're going to the Down syndrome connection to see your friends who also have Down syndrome, just like you. So if that's the case, then I think it's up to the parents as to whether that student can be in the classroom. A couple things about that. My priority is that student. My priority is that they feel comfortable, not put on the spot, and with their self-esteem maintaining intact. I also want it to be a safe environment for the other students to ask questions, and sometimes that means not having that focused student there. So that all being said, generally speaking, I have the kids at an elementary school level up until maybe 3rd or 4th grade tend to be out of the classroom. It can also be a little bit distracting for the other kids. So those kids tend to be out of the classroom while we're doing an ability awareness presentation, and as children get older and have a better understanding about themselves and about different abilities, then they can be in the classroom, and as much as possible, I'd like to give them a role of participation as well. So if the focus student is in the classroom, ideally I want to give them a role of participation as well. They can help with the book, they can show pictures of themselves that personalize it about who they are rather than what diagnosis they have. How do you prepare for a lesson? Well, like I said, first you have to talk to the parents of that focused child and make sure that they're on board. The parents can also use this time to send a letter home, if they desire, to the parents of the other classmates. It's just another opportunity to educate more people about the language we use, about people first language, about the fact that we came into their classroom, did an ability awareness presentation. They can be educated about the benefits of inclusive education, etc., etc. At the end of this short video, I will attach some slides, and one of them will be a sample letter. Other ways to prepare. Gather all the necessary materials. ask the parents to send in either blow them up or just send them in, regular size or electronically a few photographs. I usually say 3 to 6 photographs typically of the student doing things that other kids would be doing, playing softball, eating an ice cream cone with their family, things that we can draw similarities and say, oh my goodness, look at how many of you like to play softball also, or how many of you also like to go swimming. Lots and lots of kids. So what we're doing there is drawing similarities. They might also want to send in one really special photograph of that kid doing something where the kids, feel awed by. Like that child got to go on a submarine one time, or ride a horse, or maybe they met Mickey Mouse. So it can be mostly things that the other students will completely relate to, and something special if that's desired. So what does a typical lesson look like? Well, we're going to introduce who's there, who's in the room, and we're going to talk about why we're there. And I'm very clear. I'm here to talk about Down syndrome, and I tell them why I'm there to talk about Down syndrome, and that is because they have a classmate with Down syndrome, and I name that classmate. And then if that classmate isn't there, I let them know, you might notice that your classmate isn't here. They know we're here talking about Down syndrome, and by the way, they do need to know that we're there because we don't want to be dishonest. That classmate knows we're here talking about Down syndrome, but they're at the computer lab spending extra time because we didn't want to put them on the spot. They were feeling a little bit shy, and we want you guys to be able to feel safe to ask any question you want because we know you're going to ask it respectfully. So that's kind of how I set the stage and tell the students that I'm going to read a book, and I will show you a couple of options and resources for books at the end of this presentation. So I read a book, and then I'm going to let them ask questions about the book, about the focus student, about Eli if he's there, about Down syndrome, and then we do the super fun activity. And I usually tell them it's a super fun activity, but that we have to have our great listening on to be able to get to it. And again, I do state that any question is okay as long as it's asked respectfully and thoughtfully. The range of questions you get is remarkable and varies so much from kindergarten to, say, middle school and even high school. Things become technical, ethical, scientific, and very personal. So again, after the book, I show the photos to personalize it to the child, and then we move into questions and answers, and then the activity. So the 2 activities I have are both to simulate low muscle tone. One simulates low muscle tone with the hand, and you can put a sock on your non-dominant hand. And so if I'm right-handed, I put it on my left hand, and then use a writing utensil to write your name. And they will see how much more difficult that is to write your name when you have a sock on your hand. And that is how difficult it might be for somebody with low muscle tone in their hands to write their name. You can also have 2 socks, and they can try and tie their shoes. Now the other one that's super fun that everybody loves, and I do much more of, is the marshmallow activity. And the marshmallow activity, you take a large marshmallow, not the jumbo kind, but a large one, and they put it in their mouth, behind their teeth, on top of their tongue, without chewing and without swallowing, and I always tell them, and without choking, and then they'll turn to their neighbor and tell them a sentence. And that is to simulate low muscle tone in the oral region. Now I have a lot more specifics on that activity and how it's done on the handout after this video. But those are the 2 activities that I do, and those are a lot of fun. And we have a kind of a wrap-up conversation afterwards. What did kids notice? What did they notice about being the speaker during the marshmallow activity? What did they notice about being the listener? And it's kind of remarkable that what kids come up with. They really do understand that these things were fun activities, and yet they develop some empathy for how hard it might be to do these things on a day-to-day basis. And by the way, when I'm explaining the activities to the students, I tell them that we can't start the activity until one of them can tell me why I'm doing it. And so far, with 100%, they have been able to tell me why we're doing that activity. And it's always to be so that they can understand what it might feel like. That's approximately how they answer. I only do the activities usually for 2nd grade and above, sometimes 1st grade, but usually it's 2nd grade and above. So these are a few activities that you can do. The point is, make these presentations your own. You don't have to do an activity. You don't have to do the letter. You can project a book on the overhead projector or just read it in a small group. Make the presentation your own. Feel comfortable with it and feel like it's yours. So that kind of wraps up my presentation on ability awareness. And like I said, I'm going to attach some slides here that go over the main points that I try to make by age group, the general lesson plan guidelines, a sample parent-to-parent letter, and then some resources on books. Now, the book that I tend to read is one that Eli, my son, and I wrote together. That I don't have available yet. It might be available at some point in time. But for now, there's some other books that are pretty good books, and you can also make your own book if you desire. But I've listed some books on the resources page. So have fun with it. Educate students. I think it makes a big difference. Thank you.